Adventure on the Plains by Jonathan Taylor. Read by Jonathan Taylor. Chapter 1. The Vegetable Fight. Philadelphia was a bustling town in 1854. The long, narrow streets were packed with people, carts, and horses. Lining the streets were many shops, selling everything from bread to barrels. On Broadway Street there was the bank, outside of which stood a boy, watching what was going on. His name was Jack Bedford, and he was 16. He had black hair and looked quite wealthy. Presently he went back inside the bank. It was a common bank that time, with a desk and chairs on the right, and a big iron vault on the left. It also had steel grids on the windows, and on the roof was a sign, Bedford Bank. Jack was the son of John Bedford, the owner of the bank. He and his family had emigrated from England to the United States in 1832. When he had arrived in Boston, he worked at a bank before moving to Philadelphia to set up his own bank, which quickly became the most prosperous bank in the town. Jack found his father talking with a man whom Jack recognized as James Moloch, the owner of the Philadelphia Chronicle, an influential printing shop in Philadelphia. They were talking about the idea of James being Jack's apprentice. Finally, his father called him over and said, "Jack, this is James Moloch, and he has just agreed to apprentice you at his shop, since I know you would like that sort of work." "That is," corrected James, "if you behave yourself. I am a strict taskmaster, and I don't need any foolishness." Farmer Brown... No, sorry. "I am always good," cried Jack. "Oh, see that you are," retorted James. "Jack," his father reproved, "never argue with an adult. Now, I expect to see you promptly at my shop at 7:15 a.m. sharp tomorrow morning." Later, Jack was walking down the main road to his house for supper, when he saw Farmer Brown weeding in his garden. He was actually called Farmer Brown in Philadelphia, though he would have more accurately been called a gardener, as he had no animals. But people just seemed to call him that because he had the biggest garden in the town and was always working in it. "Hello, Farmer," Jack called. "Do you need some help with the weeding?" "Sure thing. This garden is full of them weeds," he replied. Farmer Brown prided himself on having the biggest and best garden in town. Unfortunately, he had sprained his leg and hadn't kept up with his garden. The garden consisted of a white picket fence, inside of which were rows of cabbages, tomatoes, lettuce, and pumpkins. Jack unlatched the gate to the garden, where he found Farmer Brown on his hands and knees with weeds strewn all over the place, and Farmer Brown wiping sweat off his face. "Phew, it sure is a hot day, and I'd be mighty obliged if you'd help. The garden has grown full of weeds, and I haven't been able to keep up with the work lately. You can start on the cabbages." Farmer Brown went inside the house to get some water, while Jack started on the weeds. Then, who should he see coming sauntering down the road but Dale Billings. He was around the age of 17, was quite strong, and generally known as a troublemaker. One time, when Farmer Brown was weeding, like he always does, he had dumped his watering can on his head. When Jack saw him, he quickly crouched down behind the gate and grabbed a tomato. He watched him sneak up to the back of the garden, climb over the fence, and start stuffing his pockets with vegetables. "Aha! Caught you, thief! Best drop those vegetables before you find a tomato in your face." Dale started and spun around to see Jack standing by the fence with a tomato in his hand. "Well, why should I be scared of you?" he drawled. "Just do as I say, 'cause I mean business." "Posh!" And he kept stuffing the pockets. Splosh went the tomatoes. It hit Dale's face and covered it with the tomato. "Hey, you take that back, you young reprobate!" he cried, and sent a poorly directed pumpkin in Jack's direction. The pumpkin missed and exploded into the white fence and covered it in the orange. Jack then hurled a cabbage at him, which hit him straight on the ear and sent him sprawling to the ground. Farmer Brown, who was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking a cup of water, All of a sudden saw a pumpkin go flying past the window while a cabbage went flying the opposite direction. He jumped up and dashed out the door just in time to get a big pumpkin in his face thrown by Dale. "Stop it, you two," he growled. "What do you think you are doing having a fight in my garden and throwing vegetables everywhere?" "Dale was trying to steal some vegetables from your garden. I saw him stuffing his pockets with vegetables, so I did the only thing I could." "I was doing no such thing," scowled Dale. "Now what is that bulge in your pocket?" replied Farmer Brown. Dale sheepishly unloaded the vegetables on the ground. "So you were stealing my vegetables. But, Jack, you should not have thrown vegetables at him. Now I expect both of you to make up for the mess you made by coming to my place at 6 tomorrow evening. And I will find you some jobs for you to do around here. And if I see any stealing, Dale, I shall report you to the sheriff. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," they both replied. "Then run along home and remember to be here at 6 o'clock tomorrow evening." When Jack got home, he found his mother making supper. His two younger brothers, Hugh and Charles, were doing their homework at the table. "Why, Jack, what have you been doing?" his mother, Martha Bedford, asked, when she saw the spots on his clothes. Jack then related his adventures in Farmer Brown's garden with Dale Billings, and how he was to be apprenticed by James Mullock at his printing shop. He finished by saying, "And I am to go to the printing shop at 7:15, and then in the evening I will go to work at Farmer Brown's." "Well, Jack, it sounds like you had some adventure today, and I hope you will learn some skills at the printing shop. Now you better get ready and get ready for supper. Your father will be here soon." After supper, Jack went and played some baseball with his brothers, and he went to bed thinking about what adventures he would have the next day. Chapter 2. Jack's Apprentice. Sun was streaming through Jack's bedroom window when he awoke to the crow of a rooster. It was the day when he was to start being apprentice at the printing shop. Jack jumped out of bed, quickly got dressed, and clumped down the stairs without even making his bed. He found his mother in the kitchen, stirring the pot of oats, and his father was eating breakfast. Hugh and Charles were still sleeping. "Mornin', Jack," his mother said. "Do you mind waking up the other boys and telling them that breakfast is ready?" Soon breakfast was finished, and John Bedford headed off to work, while Jack set off for the printing shop. It was a cool June morning, but the sky promised a hot day. The town was already alive with bustle as people were hurrying to work. Shop owners were opening up their shops, and the smell of bread from the bakery filled the air. James Mullock's printing shop was located on Oriental Avenue, and Jack soon found the shop. It was a 2-story building, with James' house on the top. The door was open, and Jack entered. The desk was at the front, and in the back there were all the printing equipment. Mr. Mullock had his head buried in a cupboard, sorting through some papers. "Hello, Mr. Mullock," Jack called. "I'm here on time." James jerked upright, hit his head, and fell to the ground with a thud. "Hey, you startled me," he said, rubbing his head. "Sorry, sir, I didn't mean to hurt you." "Well, next time be more quiet," he said, and stood up. "As I said, I require punctuality and promptness in anyone working for me. I'm not going to waste my time teaching someone who does not want to learn. Ah, here's Dale." As he said that, Dale Billings entered the shop. Jack started as he saw his former enemy, but said nothing. When Dale saw Jack, he colored and said, "What's he doing here?" "Dale, this is Jack Bedford, and he's to be apprenticed here. Jack, this is Dale Billings, and he's been hired as the delivery boy. Now expect you both to get along, or one or both of you will be displaced. The papers are on that shelf, Dale." Dale grabbed the papers and walked out to do his delivery rounds. James showed Jack how to work the printing press and the movable type. There was a chest full of metal blocks with letters on the bottom of them. The invention had a big wooden case, divided up into slots where the blocks were placed. In the corner was a can of ink and a brush, and on a shelf were stacks of paper. What you first need to do is arrange the blocks in the slots in the pattern you want to write the paper, according to the report sent in. Then, once the blocks are in place, you will brush an even coat of ink on the blocks, and put your piece of paper in the machine. Afterwards, you will press the blocks evenly on the paper using this crank. Leave it to set for a minute, and then you will remove the paper from the press and start on the next sheet. You can stack them in the cabinet for Dale to deliver, explained James. If you need any help, I'll be upstairs. Jack set to work with energy while James watched. He at first made a few mistakes when setting the blocks and covering them with ink, but soon he had made good progress, and James, satisfied with his work, went upstairs. Jack kept working, and by 12 o'clock he had 15 papers pressed. James came down and inspected his work. "Looks good, Jack," he approved. "Though you should try to keep the paper on the press longer so the words don't look blurry." Slam went the door as Dale entered for his lunch break. He hemmed and hawed and then sat down to eat his lunch. His clothes were covered with mud, and he was breathless. "Well, how'd it go, Dale?" James questioned. "Horrible," he said, dejected. "As I was handing a paper to a person, a great big dog came down the street. It saw me and ran at me barking furiously. I ran down the street with the dog on my heels. I slipped and fell in a mud puddle, and I was just able to scramble up a tree before it reached me. Finally, that sheriff called the dog back, and when I saw it was safe, I raced back here as fast as I could." "So that's why you didn't sell many papers. I guess you'll have to stay out longer until they're sold." "I will not," retorted Dale. "It ain't my fault that they weren't bought. I can't help if a dog comes along wanting to bite me." "Well, I'll go later and see if they can keep their dog tied up, but you better get back to work now." Soon lunch was finished, and Dale grabbed the new papers that Jack had printed and stomped out. Jack also got to work, and by 4:30 he had pressed 34 papers, and James was quite pleased with his work. "Soon you'll be a first-rate printer," he said. "If you stick to it, you could someday set up your own shop." Just then Dale came in with no more papers. "I sold them all out, and all the people said they were quite happy with the quality of the type," he said. "Well, Jack, just keep up with the work. It looks like it's time for you both to be heading back, but remember to be here again tomorrow at 7:15 in the morning." "Oh, we will. Bye, Mr. Mullet," Jack replied. "Bye," muttered Dale, and they set off to their homes, with Jack pleased with himself for all he had accomplished, and anxious to tell all about it to his family. Chapter 3. The Fire. Jack soon had improved greatly in the printing shop, and by the end of 4 months' work at the shop he could almost work as well as Mr. Mullock. He could do it with great proficiency, too. Dale, on the other hand, was not doing very well. He would argue a great deal more with James than he should have, and many times with Jack as well. And as Jack kept improving in the business of printing, it just made Dale jealous to see how Mr. Mullock was growing to like Jack for his hard work and his diligence. Dale knew that when Jack's apprenticeship was over, Jack could easily be hired by James or any other printing shop, as there was a great demand in that time for printers. But his prospect, on the other hand, was bleak, as he had no education and no experience in any field. Over time, the jealousy grew in Dale as Jack was gaining knowledge of the printing business. Now, an apprenticeship in the 1800s was when a father would hire a person to teach his son the skills of that particular business. It could last from 2 to 4 years of mentoring, and once the son signed on the contract, he was under law to stay with it for the period of time agreed upon. In exchange for the skills he was taught, he had to work for no pay. Sometimes his son would live in the shop, and other times, if his house was close, he would go back to work.